Hey guys, welcome back to the ranch. Today I want to show you how to populate the main board with the components I showed you which I got in the previous video. The easiest to do is to populate the main board before you put it into your case. Depending what kind of case you have, it's going to be a little tight on space in there. So I like to populate actually as much as possible outside of the case. The things you're probably going to be concentrating on, or at least what we will be doing in this build, is the CPU, the memory, the CPU fan that's going to go on top, and the M2. That's all that we're going to be able to populate outside of the case. Now, in order to populate the CPU, there is a lever here. Basically, any type of mainboard you have, be it AMD or Intel, there is going to be some kind of lever mechanism that you're going to have to push down and to the side to release. There's always going to be a security cap on the top here, which you got to remove, because this is going to protect the pins that is on the underside here. Because the CPU sits in here, this is going to close over it, and this lever makes sure that there's the proper amount of downforce pushing down, so the contacts of the CPU and the mainboard are the way they should be. Now, when you take your CPU, you will see in this case, in this Intel, there are two indentations, one here and one here, and there is also a little arrow pointing in this corner. This shows you how to install it in your socket. If you look closely, you'll see that there's an indentation here and here which corresponds to this one and this one. And you'll also notice that here you got like full corners going out, and here the corner is like kind of cut off. This shows you that it's actually this corner here. So what you want to do is just place this nice and gently in here, like that. You can slightly make sure that it moves back and forth, but do not press down on it. Now, take the cover. This one slides underneath this screw here. Move the lever back over and kind of push it out to the side, because it'll want to go underneath here and it'll push back up on it. Like this, you will see that it is secure. Now, if you have, like me, touched the CPU on top, you will be leaving grease from your hands and fingers on here. You're going to want to take some denatured alcohol and actually clean off the top of the CPU again. You can take a cotton swab or a Q-tip and just slightly glide over it to remove any grease that is on here. And then I just use the other side to dry it off, because you don't want any contaminants between the CPU and the thermal paste that's going to go on and the cooler itself, because that's basically the only thing that keeps your CPU from overheating. Now, in this case, the next step is going to be to install the CPU fan. Now, as you can see, I got the Cooler Master V8 GTS, so this is the new design. The original V8 only had one fan in the middle. This one actually has two fans on either side, which push the air to the left side, if you're looking at it like this head on. So the air gets drawn in from this side and pushed through that side out. You can see it is a massive fan. Depending what kind of CPU you have, what kind of mainboard, you're going to have different brackets that you need to install. I've already installed the correct brackets for the Intel CPU, and it comes with a bottom plate. Again, you're going to have to adjust the bottom plate to the appropriate socket and CPU type that you have, and this is going to insert from the bottom up through the main board, and so that the CPU can attach from above. So let's look how that works. You noticed I had to remove the styrofoam around it because it was actually closing the two holes underneath. And then you just take it and from the underside find the holes and push it through. That's already it. You can then let the board down again and just let it rest like that. That plate doesn't screw on from the bottom side. It's actually the top parts that's going to screw down. It's got these screws here which now screw from the top on, which will hold the bottom plate on. The instructions don't say this on this fan, but when you do, they come with these little plastic sticky rings here. Let me quickly show you. These here. What you do is you place those actually over and onto the main board. This is so when you screw this part in, that the metal doesn't make directly contact with the motherboard, so you don't potentially damage it when you're screwing it down. You've got 4 of those. There are 4 holes, so 1 over every hole, and you're good to go. Now, as I said before, these little standoffs get screwed on from the top. Just tighten them down, finger tight. I like to do it in a cross pattern so that you evenly tighten down. This now holds the bottom plate intact and will allow you to drop the CPU cooler now like so over these, and that's where the CPU cooler gets tied down onto. Next will be applying the thermal paste. I've got this Crynaut Thermal Grizzly thermal paste here. The CPU cooler does come with thermal paste, but this is a replacement board, as the first board I actually had a fault in it and I had to send it back to the manufacturer. So I figured I'd get a different thermal paste while I'm at it. So there's actually 2 methods of how to install thermal paste onto your CPU. Number 1 is you put a pea-sized dab into the center of your CPU, and then you gently put down your CPU cooler on top and evenly tighten down, and that will then evenly disperse the CPU thermal paste on the CPU and on the cooler. The other one is, at least with this type of thermal paste, they gave you like this little spatula type thing that you would basically do the same, but then you try to evenly spread it out, a nice thin layer, trying to avoid bubbles. However, in my experience, I've built hundreds of systems, servers, I've built appliances, and of course the occasional computer, gaming computer also. I have never spread it out. I've always just placed a dab in the center and placed the CPU down on it. That's why I'm going to do it the same, but it's just personal preference. So feel free to do it however you want to. Now I'm just going to take a little dab and put it right here in the center. Now you don't need too much. That's already enough. Small, really small pea, or maybe a BB size would be better to explain it, an airsoft BB. And after that, you're going to place your CPU cooler gently and evenly on it and tighten down. Get your CPU cooler, make sure it's facing in the correct direction. and place it slowly down over. Now take the nuts and slowly push them, screw them over. You can get them started basically in any way you want, but tightening down, you'll want to do it in a star pattern, just so the thermal paste gets moved and spread out evenly. I found that flipping them upside down can sometimes help if they have issues biting into the threads. And finger tight is all you're going to need. Next step is going to install the DDR memory. Now with this cooler and this mainboard, it's possible to install the memory as I said afterwards, and since I only have 2 sticks, this mainboard calls for DIMM slot A2 and B2. So just open your tabs, make sure your memory is facing the correct direction, slide it in on the side that does not have a tab, and then tilt it down on the other side till you hear the snap. And do it with the second stick also. That's it. That's how you install the memory. Now basically this is all of the pre-populating you can do outside of the case. Now what of course you can also do is you can plug your CPU into your CPU fan header, which is this mainboard right over here. So you already get that out of the way. Next is going to be to install this mainboard into your computer case, depending which one you have. I'm going to show you how I do it on mine, but that's going to really depend on which case you have. But I hope you enjoy just watching how I do it on my case. Now, as you've seen from my other video, this is the Cooler Master case. I've got the Corsair power supply. I did not go into detail now how to install those, because these things really depend on what kind of case you have. Is it in the bottom? Is it on the top? Does it slide in? Do you have a modular power supply like I do? Where can you run the cables, etc.? So I'm not going to go into detail about that. Same thing about putting in the standoffs. They're different depending on what kind of case you have. For instance, there might be something different about this case or about this mainboard, but there is a standoff missing. This board has an extra hole for a standoff, which you do not get with this board, because it says you'd have to populate everything, all number ones for an ATX mainboard, which this is, but it has a hole where number 2 would be right here, so I have no standoff for here. But that's just typical for this mainboard, I guess. You can also see that I changed one of the fans here. I'm also going to change the fans in the front to Altföhn fans, but I'm not going to show you that in too big of detail. I'm just going to give you a rough overview now of how I'm going to put this together, and I'll talk to you again once it's put together. I hope you enjoy this quick montage.